I'm sorry because I know that this conversation and learning does not come with any magic fairy dust. This conversation will not fix evil or heal wounds or chart a clear course of action. This conversation and learning tonight will do one thing. It will bring us together into a space of listening and learning with some of the most beautifully compassionate educators. And we know that some of you have personal stories that would shock and infuriate us. And I know that something tonight will be too much or not enough or the wrong thing or leave you feeling hurt or unseen. And I am sorry, because I need you to believe me that the thought of adding more pain or triggering you in any way was enough to make me not want to have this conversation at all. Because we care so, so deeply about whatever it was that pulled you into this room with us tonight. Rabbanita Lisa and I spend a lot of our time thinking about community, thinking and dreaming about what it takes to make community feel good, what makes a community, a kehillah kedosha, a force for good. So you can imagine that when there are headlines about community leaders throughout this past year, children's book authors, rabbinical school educators, congregational leaders, school principals and teachers, it has been deeply upsetting for us both, for many of us. And we heard comments and requests and asks for more spaces to hold what all of us are hearing, to hold those who were triggered by what happened, to hold those whose abusers did not make the headlines, and the victims who have not had their moment of communal validation. I'll speak for Eliza and myself. We both feel that the Jewish community can do better to validate and honor the experiences of survivors, and that we can certainly do better at addressing abuses of power and gender-based violence. We are immensely grateful to the SRE Network for partnering with us to create this space and honor the survivors among us. But we are exhausted by the headlines that seem to keep coming without enough communal reckoning. So that is what brought us here tonight. We wanted to say our community needs to talk about this up front and center and often, and not just when there are headlines. We have a responsibility as a community to talk about these hard things and to stand by each other through these hard things. And tonight's learning is exactly that. Even though there are, I am sure, any number of current communal cases of abuse in the headlines across the global Jewish community, tonight's learning is not in reaction to any one particular thing in the news. We are here to learn Torah, hard Torah, an ancient story that feels sadly current, and we are not going to look away or whitewash it. This is Torah that we need to learn too. So again, I apologize. I know that tonight will likely disappoint many of you. I know that no matter what we could possibly do tonight, we are going to disappoint someone's expectations. And I want to say clearly, those expectations are 100% valid and appropriate. And we know this topic is enormous and so important that it's laughable that we think that we can even begin to address it in one evening. So what I'm going to ask of you is your understanding that we all recognize the limitations of what we can hope to accomplish tonight. We won't meet those expectations, but I am confident that we will at least do this. We will make sure that SVIVAH is a space where we do not look away, where this conversation is important and valued, and where every survivor should know that we see you, we believe you, and we stand with you. And that we believe that the Jewish community has a responsibility to you, a role to play in your healing that deserves much more attention and care. Our educators tonight are so wonderful. I am just beyond grateful to them for how they live, how they teach, and how they share their values every day. Our partner tonight, SRE, and the resources that we'll share at the end are also committed to those same values. Tonight will not be everything, but it will be a start. And as always, we welcome and expect your feedback so that we can continue to do better. I believe that you all have my email in your inbox probably 1,000 times already. Please use it. Everything about SVIVAH is about building a better kahila, a better community that does what it's supposed to do, support and nourish us. And I hope tonight is a small step in building that ideal community. And I hope that each one of you will help us to continue building it. And with that, I get to introduce one of my favorite teachers, Rabbi Mira Wasserman, the director and visionary behind all of HerTorah. You'll see her bio in the chat, and she will start us off tonight.
Thank you so much, Ariella. It's really wonderful to see all of you here. And Ariella, thank you for your words and for your huge, beautiful heart and the way that you bring women together with so much compassion and care. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you, even though it's a hard topic, maybe even because it's a hard topic, and it's easier to be together and confront hard things together. HerTorah is a project of SVIVAH, and it's a place where Jewish women of different backgrounds, ages, life experiences, everything, all our differences, we come together to learn with and from one another. We believe that not only can you learn from the text, but we can also learn from women's lived experiences. And each of our experiences has something important to tell us. We put the texts and our lived experiences together in conversation with each other. What can we learn from the Torah stories about our own lives? And what can our own lived experiences teach us about our understanding of Torah stories? This week in synagogue, the Torah portion of Vayishlach is read. And in it, in Genesis chapter 34, we encounter the story of Jacob's daughter, Dina, being abducted and sexually assaulted by Shechem, a local prince. The Torah thinks that it's important that we know this story. It devotes a whole chapter to this story, even though the issue is hard to face. The Torah wants us to look squarely at this very difficult story in the same way that we grapple with the binding of Isaac or debate about what it meant when we ate from the tree of knowledge. The Torah thinks that this story of a woman's sexual assault deserves to be heard and learned from. As we will see, the Torah shines a spotlight on the responses of Dina's father Jacob and her brothers Shimon and Levi. It makes us question what the right response is when we hear similar stories of gender-based violence in our own communities, and it implicitly warns us of the consequences of staying silent. This is a hard story, but it's a story that we're going to face together. It's a story that the Torah modeled that we should face together, bringing it to our attention every single year. We are privileged to have two extraordinary teachers tonight who will guide us in thinking about this story and the responses to gender-based violence in Torah and today. I'll tell you more about them in a minute. We are also so fortunate to have with us Dr. Rena Phillips, who will be in a dedicated breakout room starting at 9 o'clock. In case you feel like you need to duck out of our main session and process a little bit with a wonderful therapist. We know that this is hard. Rena Phillips, LCSW, has a master's degree in social work and earned a bachelor's of psychology from Stern College and is licensed to practice clinical psychotherapy in the state of Maryland. Rena is a trained internal family systems therapist and has undergone specific training in addressing the challenges of parenting, grief and bereavement, trauma, and domestic violence. I'm going to ask Rena to introduce herself. She's going to stay with us for the beginning part when Guila and Mira are going to teach us, and then she is going to go into a breakout room, and you're welcome to visit her in the breakout room, then come back to the main room when you're ready, and we'll let you know when the breakout room opens. Rena.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. So I'm a therapist here in Silver Spring. I work in a private practice. I'm trained in internal family systems therapy, which is a specific model that is very effective in working with trauma. And I'm here tonight to provide support if anyone feels they need it, if they need to share their thoughts, their feelings, if they're feeling particularly activated or triggered. Just pop in, take a moment. We can breathe, we can talk. To be clear, this isn't a therapy space, but we do want this to be a safe learning space. So we do request no names, no specific abuse examples. So like no specific names, but you can talk about what has happened. That's really important. But disclosure of specifics can be very complicated. So just be mindful what comes up, notice how you're feeling in yourself throughout the night, and just be kind to yourself. If you need to, come to the breakout room where I'll be, just feel free. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm now really delighted and honored to introduce our educators for tonight. Rabbi Mira Beth Wasserman, PhD, is Associate Professor of Rabbinic Literature and Director of the Center for Jewish Ethics at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. The author of Jews, Gentiles, and Other Animals, the Talmud After the Humanities, her research and teaching focus on how classical rabbinic texts can serve as resources for ethical guidance today. Mira is Rabbi Emerita of Congregation Beth Shalom in Bloomington, Indiana, and now lives with her family near her hometown of Philadelphia. Rabbi Mira has been very active in researching and writing and talking about the Torah of Me Too. Dr. Guila Benchimol is the Senior Advisor to the Safety, Respect, Equity Coalition to address sexual harassment and gender discrimination in Jewish spaces. She is also a research associate at the Center for the Study of Social and Legal Responses to Violence, working on projects related to homicide and domestic violence deaths. Guila holds a PhD in sociological criminology and an MA in criminology and criminal justice policy. Her research interests have been influenced by her first career as a Jewish educator. Guila was the managing director of NCSY Canada, where she founded an overnight camp for high school girls, and the director of Judaic Studies at Tiferes Beis Yaakov, where she also taught Tanakh to grades 9 through 12. Guila is honored to be on the board of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. Thank you so much for being here with us and for teaching us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be with you. And it was such a meaningful introduction and framing. I'm already moved. I'm going to jump right in because we have big aspirations for learning and conversation and sharing tonight. And during this beginning part, first I'm going to speak, and then Guila is going to speak, and then we're going to have some conversation all together. And then I'm going to be able then Guila and I will be talking with each other, and then we're going to have more opportunities for everybody to participate some more. So that's sort of the arc of what's going to happen, and then we'll have Rena help us get centered at the end. So that's where we're going. In this beginning part, I have two tasks. Rabbanit Aliza already told us a bit about the story from the Torah. I'm gonna also offer a bit of a summary. But in addition to the summary, what I really want to do is advance a very particular interpretation of this Torah story. I'm going to argue that the particular way that this story is told conveys an ethical message, and that if we read between the lines, the Torah is subtly inviting us, and this sounds very provocative, but I'm going to argue that the Torah is inviting us to make a judgment about our ancestor, our patriarch, Jacob. Jacob has a very particular response to the assault of his daughter. And I think the Torah is inviting us in this story to stand in judgment of that response or non-response. So that's the argument that I'm going to make in just a few minutes. First, let me say the way that this evening was framed was about responses to abuse in the Torah. And that's not accidental. What the Torah gives us is a lot more response from people who surround Dina than the experience of Dina herself. And that's why I'm so grateful that we have Guila with us to help us imagine our way into Dina's experience. But the Torah is focusing on responses to a sexual assault. And so we're focusing on a response too. We learn very little about Dina in the Torah. We learn that she's born and named. We learn that she goes out to be with the local people of Canaan, where her family has just arrived, and she's abducted and assaulted. What we get instead of her story is a lot of details about how the men around her respond. So just a quick overview of the story, and then we'll return to it in some detail. She's attacked by a prince of the land, by Shechem. After the attack, he wants to keep her. He wants to marry her. And so together with his father, he goes to ask Dina's father, Jacob, our ancestor, for permission to marry Dina. Jacob keeps silent. Jacob lets his sons, Dina's brothers, enter into negotiation with the attacker Shechem and his father Hamor, and they make an agreement that Shechem and all of the men of their community, all the men of the town, will become circumcised. And after they're circumcised, they will be free to intermarry with Jacob's family. Everybody agrees to this, and this is sort of the foundation for Jacob's family, for Dina's brothers agreeing that she can stay married and be married to Shechem. The men all circumcise themselves, and then while they are healing from the circumcision, Dina's brothers, Shimon and Levi, go and kill all of the men in their beds. The other brothers join in the attack in looting the community. That's the summary of this very disturbing and violent story. And now I want to share my screen and also share a link to a source sheet in the chat so we can delve into some of the details. So I put a link in the chat, but I'm also going to share my screen so I can highlight some of what I see is happening between the lines to try to develop this ethical argument that I'm making, that the Torah is actually inviting us to stand in judgment of Jacob. Doing my time check. I'm going to do this really quickly. So really, I have three related claims for how we can read between the lines of the Torah. The first is that Jacob abdicates responsibility as a parent and as a leader. And if you see in the text in Genesis 34, verse 5, it says that Jacob heard about this attack, but since his sons were in the field with his cattle, Jacob kept silent until they came home. As the story continues, I'm going to seek to show you that this silence is judged as problematic by the Torah. Let's track how the relationships between Jacob and his daughter are depicted. First, at the beginning of the story, I'm going to bring you up to the very beginning where Dina is introduced. You see Dina here in verse 1. Now Dina, the daughter whom Leah had borne to Jacob, she's identified as the daughter of both Leah and Jacob. Later in the story, after the attack, in verse 6, Shechem's father Hamor comes to Jacob to speak to him. But still Jacob keeps silent. And it's only when his sons come that they enter into conversation with Shechem's father, Hamor. It says, meanwhile, Jacob's sons, having heard the news, came in from the field. The men were distressed and very angry because he had committed an outrage in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing not to be done. Notice that here, Dina is squarely identified as Jacob's daughter. But then Hamor speaks not to Jacob. Remember in verse 6, he came to speak to Jacob, but now he's speaking with a plural, with them. He's speaking with the sons as well as with the father, with Dina's brothers. And he says, my son Shechem longs for your daughter, Bit Chem, your daughter, plural. Somehow Dina has now become the possession, not just of Jacob, not the daughter, not just of Jacob and Leah, but of all of these brothers as well. I'm suggesting that's what's happening here very subtly in the way the Torah tells the story, is that Jacob's fatherhood is being challenged in some ways, that in keeping silent, he is allowing himself to be pushed out of the story. And more, his silence allows the brothers, his sons, to take over. Look what happens in this negotiation. Jacob's sons are the ones who answer Shechem and his father Hamor. They speak with guile because he had defiled their sister Dina, and they go through this negotiation. And look at the end in verse 17. Here again, they, even though they're brothers, they identify Dina as our daughter. They've totally displaced Jacob's role as father, as leader of the family. In his absence, in his silence, he's made this opening, this vacuum that his children, his sons, step into. And that, I'm going to argue, sets the stage for their violence. Jacob's silence is a non-response, and it leads directly to the violence that his sons inflict on this entire town. You'll see at the end of this chapter 34 in verse 30, Jacob speaks for the first time in the story. After the violence, he says, you have brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My fighters are few in number, so that if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed. He expresses upsetness about what they do, but they're given the last word. They say, but they answered, should our sister be treated like a whore? So the whole chapter here ends with this rhetorical question. Decades and decades pass, many years. And the way that trauma stays with us, sometimes many years after the initial injury, we learn when Jacob is on his deathbed that the story has stayed with him. And on Jacob's deathbed, this is in Genesis 49 at the end of the book of Genesis, Jacob calls all of his sons together for a final blessing. But the words that he has for Shimon and Levi, the ones who lead this massacre, are actually not words of blessing, but words of a curse. He says, Shimon and Levi are a pair. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. Let not my person be included in their council. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, they slay a man, and when pleased, they maim an ox. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel. At the end of his life, he finds words, but they're words of a curse. And it suggests that this story, this trauma has stayed with him throughout his life. So Jacob judges the sons as having done the wrong thing. That's Jacob's judgment. And I want to suggest that the Torah the voice of the Torah underlines, confirms, affirms, assents to Jacob's negative judgment of Shimon and Levi, when at the very, very, very end of the Torah, now in Moses's final blessing to the tribes of Israel, this is in Deuteronomy 33, there's a very striking omission that as Moses is blessing all of the tribes, the tribe of Shimon isn't mentioned at all. So I'm suggesting that in between the lines is confirming the curse that Jacob left with Shimon and Levi when he died, and further that it's that the Torah is inviting us to see how Jacob's silence made an opening that led directly to violence, and the violence kept on reverberating through the lives of Jacob, his sons, and their descendants. I'm over time, and so Guila, to you, let me stop the share and thank you again for the opportunity to share words of Torah, as difficult as they are. Guila.
Thank you, Rabbi Mira. I just want to know that you are reminding me of how my research was fueled by this initial question of what is the relationship between silence and violence, and how they can each lead to each other, they can perpetuate each other, they allow them to continue. And so that's what we're going to look at tonight. Thank you to Rabbi Eliza and to Ariella, Rabbi Nita Eliza and to Ariella and to Rabbi Mira for including me in this scary topic. I hope I do justice to those of us with lived experience of victimization and or being failed by our communities, while also acknowledging that our every person's experience is unique and different, and we all are looking for different things. A nod to the Canadians who put in the chat that they are here. I want to note that tonight, December 6th, marks the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, a day commemorated in Canada as the anniversary of the 1989 École Polytechnique massacre, in which I will not name him, a man murdered 14 women in the name of fighting feminism. I'm going to put a link in the chat for anybody who wants to read about it. And I also want to note that today is day 10 of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which is an annual international campaign that starts on November 25th and ends on December 10th, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, which is Human Rights Day. So I'm putting those two in the chat. When we planned this, we did not notice that was what today is, but what better time to gather around this topic and to commemorate these women who we're going to question, and we question about Dina. What would have been had the ending been different? What would have been? And so before we look at the text, from a survivor perspective, and the hats I'm wearing are Jewish educator, a criminologist, a sociologist, and a survivor too, and somebody who holds the stories of other survivors. I want to extend SVIVAH's beautiful title. Did you hear what happened to Dina? Who told you? How was it said? What did you respond? Did you bother to check in on Dina, or did you just call the next person to gossip around what you heard? I want us to look at that, because that's the communal response. It's not limited to what happened to Dina, it's in everything else that comes after. And just the idea of the word Dina, when you say, we're going to talk about the Parsha of Dina, right? You right away know you're going to talk about rape. You right away know you're going to talk about sexual violence. And that reminds me of survivors who said to me, I didn't want to disclose because I was afraid that that's all I would be to people. All I would be is a survivor. Every single other thing in my life that I have accomplished and all my other identities would become subsumed in this violence that was done to me versus everything that I had done. And going back to what Rabbi Mira said, we know so little about Dina, and that is unfortunate. And so I'm going to share the translation that I used. It is a Chabad translation. The link is in the chat for anybody who wants to open it. I'm going to run very quickly through the verses on a very surface level. I didn't use any other commentary other than Rashi, but I'm not even going to really turn to the Rashi. I'm going to do a very basic reading of a survivor perspective, watching the community respond or not respond to the violence that happened to them. And what angered me in reading this, and thank you to SVIVAH for allowing me to get angry and to do radical reading of text as an Orthodox woman. This is not what I was encouraged to do growing up or as a Jewish educator. So this is refreshing and real and honest. I was angered by the lack of Dina's presence in the story, and sometimes even the lack of naming her in the story. And so the first verse, Dina, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to look among the daughters of the land. Dina is named, her mother is named, and she has some agency. She is doing something. I'm not going to talk about the commentaries that blame her for going out because I refuse to teach that Torah. Now, it reminded me of survivors who talked about disclosing to their mothers, because this is the only place in this parsha, in this section, where Leah, the mother, is named. And the women survivors talk about what it was like to disclose to their moms and how the mother's response impacted their abilities to either move forward or to go back into silence. But that's all we hear about the woman-to-woman relationship in this entire piece of Torah. It then turns to the men, and that's basically all we hear from. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So Shechem, the son of Hamor, the prince of the land, saw her, and he took her, lay with her, and violated her. So Dina immediately becomes invisible and unnameable. Her, she is just a she. And it moves from Dina to the girl. And the shift is now the male gaze, what he did to her, right? In the first one, we're told what Dina did as a woman, but now it's all about what was being done to her. And the shift is now completely the male gaze. I'm just working with some screens. So if you see me looking elsewhere, it's just at other screens. And his soul cleaved to Dina, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the girl and spoke to the girl's heart. Again, the actor is the perpetrator, the one who harms. And we are very worried about how he feels after the fact, how he feels after what he does. We don't hear anything about the impact on her, but we are told to be concerned about his emotions. Well, he did this because of love. How many times have survivors been told, it came from a good place, right? And that kills survivors. Survivors have said they're disgusted by that kind of justification for what was done to them. And Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Take this girl for me as a wife." And so this is where I wrote in my notes, the patriarchy now steps in to make decisions about the girl who was victimized and her fate. This made me think about specifically with Jewish survivors who have said to me, I didn't want to go outside of the Jewish community to deal with this. So I went to the men who are in charge. I went to the rabbis or the leadership. And I said to them, can you do something for me? But they went and they made decisions on their own, and they had conversations that didn't include me. And I didn't know any of what was going on. But it was about me, and it was about what happened to me. And they didn't bother to come to me and ask me what kind of decision he would want. Jacob had heard that he had defiled his daughter Dina, but his sons were with his livestock in the field, and Jacob kept silent until they came home. So who tells Jacob here? And this made me think about, how do family members find out about the violence that their relatives have faced? Survivors have talked about what it means to disclose to their family members, the considerations that they take, especially if the violence has occurred within the family, but also, will it break their relationship with family members who they know won't believe them? Are they worried about the family's reputation, which we see again at the end, right? Will she be considered a whore? That's what the brothers say at the end. So this made me think about, who does the telling here? She doesn't even get to disclose to her own father, right? It is being told with the male gaze from the male perspective. And what does that do to the narrative? What does it do to survivors' narrative and their place in it and their experience? And her father is silent, as Rabbi Mira told us, until the sons arrive. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him, and Jacob's sons had come from the field when they heard, and the men were grieved, and they burned fiercely because he had committed a scandalous act in Israel. So why are they mad? Because he had committed a scandalous act in Israel, not because they raped their sister. Then, because he had committed to lie with a daughter of Jacob, and such ought not to be done, right? When we talk about sexual violence in our community, where is our focus? Is it just that it's nicht, a Sephardic using Yiddish, not done? Or is it about the individuals and the harm that it does to them, and an understanding that when our community refuses to respond, it actually harms the community too? That harm reverberates. There are ripples of harm, and there can be ripples of healing. And here they are angry. And survivors have spoken to me about anger, that when someone finds out, someone they love finds out about what happened to them, their anger is not always what survivors want to see. I remember specifically one survivor talking about the fear she had at the anger of a man that she loved when she told him what happened. And he said, I want to, punch him out, or I'm so angry. She said, first of all, is this about me, or is this about you? And secondly, she said, there was violence committed against me. I don't need more violence. And it is the women who are often the ones saying, don't continue down that path, right? While men's response is often violence begets violence. I'm going to for sure run out of time, so I'm just going to run through this. And Hamor spoke with them, saying, my son Shechem, his soul, has a liking for your daughter. Please give her to him for a wife. No acknowledgement of the violence. She is only a daughter and a wife here. And this has reminded me, especially after Me Too, for those of you who remember, a lot of men were saying, as a father of a daughter, as a brother of a sister, as the husband of a wife, as if that's the only way women can be seen in their full humanity. And this reminded me of that. And women need to be seen by the men in our communities as whole people, not just as an extension of themselves that God forbid should be harmed, but as individuals in their own right. And intermarry with us, you shall give your daughters, and you shall take our daughters for yourselves. So this act of violence becomes an opening of relationships between the men of Shechem and the women of Israel. No agency for the women. Rape here is a gateway to marriage, which is supposed to be a holy, loving union. And that's supposed to be the foundation of a relationship between two nations, predicated on rape, predicated on sexual assault. And you shall dwell with us in the land, shall be before you, remain, do business here, and settle here. So women are just commodities, right? We're just a commodity with which to do business. Survivors talking about how they feel used by the community when the community decides how to respond. So there's an agenda, and the survivors, if they fit in the agenda, sometimes their cause will be taken up, and how painful it is to them to not be important in and of themselves without that communal agenda. And Shechem said to her father and to her brother, may I find favor in your eyes, whatever you tell me, I will give. So who is being appealed to here? It is not the victim that is being appealed to here, right? Where is the victim in these conversations? Impose upon me a large marriage settlement and gifts, and I will give as much as you ask of me, but give me the girl for a wife. Thereupon Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with cunning, and they spoke because after all, he had defiled their sister Dina. They devise a plan, but they don't ask the victim about it. They don't consider the ramification of this plans on her. And they are not naming who's been most impacted and what has happened. And they said to them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to a man who has a foreskin, for that is a disgrace to us, right? Again, the male perspective is being prioritized. We're going to run out of time, so I'm going to just go through my notes on the text because we're not going to get to go through the text. But this next pasuk is what really bothered me, verse 15. But with this, however, we will consent to you if you will be like us, that every male will be circumcised. So consent is used 3 times in this entire 31 verses. And I got so angry when reading this, because who is giving consent, who is being asked to give consent? Not Dina, right? It is that deal between the brothers and the nation of Shechem. And so what do women feel about the requests? How are they even asked, if at all? And what is women's job? After sexual violence, women in the community, not just the survivor, but women in the community are asked to explain to men, to cover for men, to put our stories out there so the men might get it. That's a really difficult job for survivors and women in the community to hold. As you go through the verses, you see a language of give and take about the land. The land, by the way, is feminine in the Hebrew language, and it made me think of, well, it's also give and take about the women. Women too. I was translating the feminine language here for the land as the women themselves, and they are also, just as I said before, these commodities. When survivors have talked to me, you know, they have talked about, I want to get to decide what happens with the perpetrator. I want to get to decide the kinds of future relationship. That is not ever asked of Dina in the verses here. Later, if you go down to verse 21, they say, they're trying to convince them to get the circumcision, right? These men are peaceful with us and they will dwell in the land and do business there. Now, the word peaceful in Hebrew is shalemim, but it also has the same root word as shalem, which is whole. And that to me stood in such contrast to the shattering of Dina, the shattering that survivors talk about experiencing in the act of sexual violence, in the aftermath, and the profound abandonment and further shattering that they face when the community leaves them alone. So that juxtaposition of whole men to shattered women who are not even seen and not even named again at all. And just this idea that we are never even considered the impact of the sexual violence on the survivor herself in this story. I want to turn to verse 24, and all those coming out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male all went out of the gate of his city and they became circumcised. So they decide to go along with this plan. They decide to get the circumcision so that they can get the women, so that they can make this peace trade with the Jewish people, with Jacob's sons. I'm thinking about men who've approached me, and this is so radical and so rare. So I'm going to say this is not the norm. Who've approached me to say, I know a man who has done harm. How can we help him take accountability? Now, it's not exactly what's happening in this verse, but the man who raped is now bringing along others, not in a positive act per se, but they're saying, let's make a peace treaty with these others. But there are some responses where I have seen men say, I want to help my friend take accountability. That is so opposed to what we usually see. And I want to turn to that a little bit later when we come to the communal response later on. Verse 29, all their wealth and all their infants and their wives, they captured and plundered, and all that was in the house. I want to talk about here a kind of anger, a kind of vigilantism, a kind of sometimes even advocacy that is scary for survivors, where people want to stand up for them, but it's not safe for survivors the kind of way they want to stand up for them. So do we bother to ask survivors, is this safe for you? Maybe you don't want your voice, but if I'm speaking, is this safe? Does this feel okay? Does this feel right? Later on, it struck me when leaders react to community members who choose to speak up, right? Rabbi Mira, you spoke about Jacob's response, right? It wasn't okay what you did, he tells the brothers. You made me look bad. And community leaders often say, you really want to stand up to talk about sexual violence? SVIVAH is going to do this event. They're going to talk about this really scary topic, and they're going to do it in public with all of these women in the room. Is that good for the Jewish people? Rabbi Mary Zamor published an article yesterday with someone else. I'm forgetting the name right now. I'll try to throw it in the link. We need to talk about sexual violence of Jewish women by Jewish men, even in the face of rising anti-Semitism. We are not doing an injustice to look squarely at our mistakes. And then the final thing I want to say, verse 31, And they said, shall we make our sister like a harlot, according to the Chabad translation? Is this the concern? Is this the concern that we have? I've gone way over time, and I apologize for that, but I hope this gives a different kind of a perspective and a kind of reading of the verses with Dina's perspective, or Dina watching other people act around her. And I want to open it up to the room, whether you want to put it in the chat or you want to share it with us, by unmuting yourself. What kind of responses to victimization have you seen or experienced, you don't have to name, that have been helpful? And what kind of communal responses to victimization have you seen that have been harmful? Please remember to